What's going on, YouTube? So right before we get started, don't forget to click like and subscribe if you enjoy these content, and also don't forget to check out on my Instagram page. Yes, add me on my Instagram. You guys get to see behind the scenes on what I'm working on. This video right here has all been recorded probably 2 weeks ago. So anyways, in this video we'll be doing Nikon D500 versus the Nikon Z9 in crop mode, everything in crop mode. So with all that said, let's begin. So the Nikon Z9 versus the Nikon D500. Right before we even start with this comparison, I want to remind people that I did compare the Nikon D500 versus the other brand. I think the latest brand was the Pentax K3 Mark III that came out last year at 26 megapixel APS-C DSLR at $2,000, and the Nikon D500 just spanked that camera. It spanked that camera in every single category. It was kind of mind-blowing when I think about it, because that's a 2016 camera taking on a 2021 camera, and Nikon D500 just reigns supreme at that point. I mean, I compared it with the 7D Mark II and the 90D as well, and put it this way, D500 has the best image quality I ever seen in an APS-C camera. But in this video, we're going against the best DSLR versus the flagship mirrorless Nikon Z9. So let's take a look at some prices now. The Nikon Z9 costs $5,500 and the D500 costs, well, number one, it's discontinued. Number two, you could probably get it for $800 on eBay, $900 depending on the shutter count. According to the B&H website, you could get around 1,120 bucks. So there you go. We're comparing a Z9 flagship with a discontinued camera. So this is going to be interesting, of course. Now, in terms of the crop size, D500 at 20.9 megapixel, this is what it looks like, right? The Z9 in crop mode, this is what it looks like. Now, in my honest opinion, it's roughly around 1.5 megapixel difference. It's not that big of a difference, but I do want to point out that there is a megapixel difference when you're shooting crop mode with the Z9. Now, in terms of size, obviously the Z9 is a lot heavier than the D500. It's 1,340 on the Z9, whereas the D500 is 860 grams. Now, in terms of video, surprisingly, the D500 has 4K. This is 2016, so 4K 30p crop, of course. Nikon Z9 also has video, but we won't get into that, of course, because the video in the Nikon Z9 is too complex versus the D500. I'm just gonna let it be at this point, but we'll definitely talk about video and Z9 down the road when we compare with the R5C, so stay tuned. Now, in terms of the OVF and EVF and the screen, I would have to say that the D500 has the tilt screen, whereas the Z9 has the 4-axis tilting screen, which is very interesting. And I also want to point out that the monitor screen, the 3.2 monitor screen, they both have the same size, it seems, but the D500 surprisingly has more details than the Z9. I can't make this up. I know you guys are sitting there like, no, it has to be wrong. Z9 is flagship. No way Nikon will cheap that out. Let me show you guys the website of Nikon. I don't usually do this, but I'll do this for this particular situation. If you look at the actual website, yes, it does. It does have more detail on the D500 versus the Z9, and that's very unexpected. But anyways, also the Nikon Z9 came out 2021, whereas the D500 came out around 2016. The Z9 has IBIS and the Nikon D500 do not. We are seeing dual XP5 versus dual XP7, so keep that all in perspective. Now, in terms of battery, the Z9 has that EL18D, whereas the Nikon D500 has the EL15 battery. Now, in terms of the actual shots, this is what Nikon is claiming, and it looks like it's roughly around 5,310 shots in burst mode on the Z9, whereas the Nikon D500 is 1,240 shots. And also, keep things in more perspective, it depends on the shooter. I actually got more shots than what they're claiming on this webpage by Nikon, but obviously we have to go by this because that's their standard. But if you're viewing a lot of photos, every time you take a burst shot, I mean, you're killing out the batteries. So with that said, in my honest opinion, Z9 has more shots per battery because it's bigger and is more efficient than the Nikon D500. Now in terms of memory slots, the Nikon Z9 takes 2 Type B CF Express, which means you're paying a lot to store your images on these expensive cards, whereas the D500, you could use SD cards, you could use QXD cards, and if you updated your firmware, you could use the new CF Express card. And speaking about cards, in this next test, we'll be testing out both systems with the same exact CF Express card, the Sony card right here. And we'll be testing out the frames per second. And here is a Nikon D500. Here is the Nikon Z9. Here is both of them on top of one another. And as you can see, the Nikon D500 tops out at 200 frames as stated by Nikon. And for the Nikon Z9, it could shoot forever in crop mode, it seems, because I stopped roughly around 1,200 shots. And also keep in mind, if you look at the volume of the shutter slap on the D500, it's a lot louder than the Z9. For the Z9, I could probably turn off the noise of the shutter. I turned some volume on to show you guys, but you could turn that off. So in the end, in theory, is actually a better shooting experience with the Z9 because you won't scare the birds away with your shutter clap, and also you could shoot forever. Yeah, there's no buffer. That's amazing actually. Now with all that tech specs out the way, let's take a look at some image quality tests. Now here's the scene right here. This is a landscape scene. I'm using a kit lens and I'm going to show you guys that the left is the Z9 because of the size differences, and the right is the D500. And if you take a look at the entire scene, it looks more or less the same, but in my opinion, I think the Z9 is just a tad hair brighter than the D500, but I don't think anyone can tell the difference. I mean, the sky looks a little different on the Z9 versus D500. Now in this next scene, this is a different day. It looks more or less the same in my honest opinion. Maybe the color on the floor might be different, maybe. Let me know your thoughts down below. We have the same lens, same settings, same everything. It looks more or less the same at this point, right? Here's another scene, clear sky day, and yeah, I can't tell the difference. Maybe the Z9 is a tad hair brighter, but yeah, I don't think anyone can see any difference, which is good for those shooters that own the D500. If you're shooting with the same exact exposure, your images is more or less the same. Now this next test is the ISO test, and we will start at 64 ISO on the Nikon Z9 versus the Nikon Z9 at ISO 100. Yeah, that's crazy. Z9 has ISO 64, whereas the 500 do not. Yeah, that's pretty cool. But anyways, here is the side by side. This is ISO 100 versus one another. 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, 12,800, 25,600. Now, I also want to point out that I'm at 48 millimeters on my zoom lens versus 50. I don't think it makes any big difference right there, but sometimes the zoom is kind of weird. But anyways, this last test, we are doing dynamic range tests. We're just shooting underexposed images and we're just pushing out the exposure to see the difference between each camera. And looking at the results, the Z9 seems to be able to keep its color pretty close actually. The D500 seems to be slightly over. Yeah, look at that purple. It's just slightly purple, like kind of burnt a bit. So if you're shooting low light, the crop on the Z9 is superior than the D500. XP7 versus XP5. There we go. Here's another scene. I'm going to underexpose the shot and push out the exposure, and this is what it looks like. there you go. The story remains the same. Definitely the Z9 will keep most of the colors, whereas the D500 seems to be slightly overburnt. But not too bad on the D500 for such an old camera, 6 years old. But Z9 keeps the color intact in underexposed scenarios. Let's take a look at an indoor scene. Now in this next scene, we have a very dark scene. You can't see anything. We're in the studio and I'm just pulling out the exposure, and there we go. The D500 colors are not accurate versus the Z9 when you're pushing the exposure out. Definitely the D500 falls kind of flat. It turns purple on the D500, whereas the Z9 keeps it accurate. That is pretty cool actually. So yeah, this is 6 years old of tech right there. Crop mode, XP5 versus 7. So just to wrap things up, the Nikon Z9 versus the Nikon D500. Both cameras has its own pros and cons, but let's just talk about the D500 and its pros before we get to the pros on the Z9. Number one on the pros for the D500 is it's cheaper. Yes, it's cheaper than the Z9. Obviously, everyone has their own budget. If you're trying to shoot wildlife on a budget, definitely the D500 will be perfect for you guys out there. Number two, the D500 monitor screen is a lot more detailed than the Z9, which is kind of weird. I don't know why Nikon did that. That's really odd actually. But anyways, number three, the D500 is lighter. It's more compact than the Z9, obviously. So if you have sort of like a physical thing going on with your back, like I did at one point, and my knees, definitely carrying a D500 will be perfect to go out with. So there you go, right? And also, last but not least, the D500 has a variety of native lenses you can pick from, whereas the Z9, you need adapters and all sorts of other things to have everything kind of like work together in terms of, you know, firmware updates and stuff like that. But with the Z9 though, you could shoot forever. There's no buffer like the D500 like you saw. So that's one. Number two, the incredible dynamic range is superior than the D500. If you're shooting like in darkness, definitely the D500 isn't going to give you any luck with that. The Z9 will. And number three, definitely the Z9 has just about everything you could think of. I mean, it has the 8K, the 4K, it has like longer battery life, it has everything you can think of. I mean, even the shutter clap, right? You could turn that off, you could shoot wildlife. I think when people go to these places and take photos, they don't think about people around. But if you're going to these places to shoot wildlife, right? Let's say the zoo, either camera will work just fine. If you're going to a tour where you're shooting wildlife together as a group, everyone knows one another sort of, either camera will work just fine in that scenario. However, if you are going outdoors alone and you are going to meet strangers, either a hunter, another photographer, another person out there, your shutter clap on your D500 is going to alert the animals, right? Which is going to make you look kind of like, you know, they may say something negative to you if they don't know you out there. This is why mirrorless is becoming a thing now. A lot of shooters out there are shooting mirrorless because of that feature, because birds in general, they could hear you. Because if you're slapping like, they could hear you. So in that case, only people that are shooting D500 now, I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this, only people that are shooting D500 currently today, they're just considered kind of like amateur shooters, because they should know by now that when you're shooting birds, you should not be making noises, right? So there you go. Definitely the Z9 is a perfect system for that scenario. And I can't imagine ruining, actually it did happen. I ruined someone's shot, a hunter shot, and he really wasn't too happy with me. I think some people already know this story, but yeah, you just gotta be careful out there. With all that in mind, I think at the end of the day, it's really up to you, your budget, what you want to do. If you're serious about wildlife photography, definitely Z9 in the Nikon world is excellent. D500 is still excellent. Just remember other people that may be shooting along with you. You've been warned, guys. You've been warned. But anyways, thank you guys for checking me back. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely click like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one, all right? Take it easy. Peace.